We are going to build up these tables in which we have a quantity of value and a quantity of price. And he's going to demonstrate that under certain assumptions, lucky countries will exchange value at an inflated price, and unlucky countries will exchange value at a diminished price. Let's say this is one country, country A, with 3 branches of economic production. This column is constant capital, which is the entire quantity of capital used up in one cycle. This is the wages, and this is surplus value. So in section 1, we're going to have an entire quantity of value which consists of 2/3 constant capital, and the remainder is divided evenly between variable capital at 20 and surplus capital at 20. So this is the objective amount of value used in section 1 of country A's entire economy. And the numbers are similar for sections 2 and 3. The established fact is that profit is revenue minus expenses, which is going to be this entire value minus the expenses of wages minus the expenses of used up resources, which in Marxist economics is referred to as surplus value. So in this table, what we have is the rate of profit, capital T, is the entire surplus divided by the entire constant capital plus the entire variable capital, which means exactly 60 divided by 240 plus the variable capital, which is equal to 1/5. Profit is equal to the rate of profit times the capital invested. So in the first category, it's 20% of the constant plus the variable. As you see here. The price of production if profit is equal to revenue minus expenditures, and that's equal to the rate of profit times the capital invested. He's computing the price of production as the constant plus variable, which is the expenditure plus the profit. So the expenditure is C plus V, and the revenues is P. This is our hypothetical country A. So country A in itself is producing a grand total of 360 hours of value, and the price of this is 360. So in Marxist economics, the labor theory of value is the following claim. Value is measured in labor hours. What does that mean in terms of these numbers? Well, this is a definition of how to measure value, which means that this category, well, as far as we're concerned, and as far as the labor theory of value is concerned, this category is therefore a number of hours of labor time. So the book presents certain economic, he has certain decisions about how his economic system works. Now, I'm going to present what's true. So, the law of value is the following. The law of value states that the price approximates value. So, something that's twice as valuable will be approximately twice as expensive. So therefore, we can replace the word price here by value. And if you do that, it should be apparent that the value of production is the same concept as value, which is why these numbers are going to be the same. In the book, the phrase price of production is used in the following sense. Price of production is used as the Marxist term for equilibrium price. For that reason, it's not really different from value or exchange value. I mean, as far as the book is concerned, price of production is synonymous with the also Marxist concept of exchange value. Now, what should be done is to consider either all value or all profits together. In this diagram, what's presented as value and prices. I am not going to detail any mistakes that are made because of this, so it's a non-issue. Okay, consider a separate system B. Let's say this is a completely unrelated country, which also has divided its economy into 3 portions. The values for the different aspects of production are given here, which is different from in system A. In this system, we're producing a total value of 240, meaning that the output at the very end is going to have a price representing a value of exactly 240. What is different between these two systems is the numbers. What is significant between these two systems is that the rate of profit is 1/5 in the first one, but in country B, the rate of profit is 1/3. So this means the capitalist in country B are taking in more value, which also means that the capitalists in country A are forced to produce in a way that packs in more value into their products. So unequal exchange occurs in the interaction between these two systems. So this is presented on page 55. A and B together is this. This is country A, and the numbers are duplicated up to this point. This is country B, and the numbers are duplicated up to this point. Now we compute the totals, and we observe that the surplus value divided by the total constant capital plus the total variable capital is going to be 1/4. We're labeling this quantity with the phrase rate of profit. Profit is the rate of profit times the capital invested, and we obtain these numbers. So 25% of the capital invested in this first row is 25, and the resulting price of production in this first row is 125 right here. What you'll notice is that this value, the price of production, comes from a smaller value. So this is sort of the first indication that there's something unequal going on whatsoever. Now, for simplicity, what we're going to do is we're going to collapse all the different internal sections in the economy into just one. So we're going to consider just country A versus country B. Okay, at this point we're prepared to state the definition of unequal exchange. Before I state the definition of unequal exchange, I'm going to describe how it happens. Okay, country A produces 360 valuable hours of some commodity. And they sell it, the international sort of objective price of what they produce is 375. At the same time, B contributes what's valuable to them at 240 in order to produce something whose international objective price is 225. So let's say that A sells their product. They're going to sell something that has a price of production objectively at 375, and it costs them 360. So that's just a straightforward surplus of 15. And if B does the same thing, if they spend 240 in order to produce something that's 225, then they have a deficit. That they just suddenly they're in the red. So let me describe in more detail what these numbers come from. So let's look at 375. 375 is equal to C plus V plus P. which is equal to constant plus variable plus profit is the rate of profit times C plus V. So it's the capital invested plus the rate of return multiplied by the capital invested. Now, this is sensible, this is completely undeniable, granted the following claims: that the capital invested is this, which is given in the table. I mean, it's not disputable. And assuming that the rate of return is capital T. We calculated the rate of profit here, so I'm not going to elaborate on that. So, what is unequal exchange? Well, what is labor worth right now? So, consider added value. Constant capital could have come from anywhere, so we don't know. We're not going to consider valorization or anything mischievous in that category. So let's consider added value. A has an added value of what they produced in the very end, which is 375, minus the capital they invested is 240. So the entire country of A observes that their economic production nets them the workers and the capitalists together overall get 135 units of value, which is measured in hours. Now, let's consider B's added value. What they get is 225, and what they invested, what they used up was 120, meaning that overall they receive 105 units of value. But this is a contradiction, because if we think of what is an hour worth, well, 1 hour should be worth 1 hour of value, period. But what A observed is that they got 135 hours of value by investing 120 hours of value. So they got this in exchange for 120, and B got 105 in exchange for 120. So this precisely is unequal exchange. What occurred is that the countries came into exchange with each other, and even though they both put in the same amount of labor, 60 hours of labor for both of them, it's worth more to A and less to B. So this right here is the definition of unequal exchange. exclamation point. One way of describing this is that B has to work extra time in terms of real value in order to exchange something for A, and A gets to get away cheaply and exchange the same price nonetheless. So the more A and B exchange, the more A comes out ahead and B sinks into a deficit. Okay, what I'm going to do now is present a counterexample. I'm going to present an example in which this turns out to be preposterous. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in an Excel spreadsheet. So what I have here is the exact same tables, and I'm going to compute everything using as an Excel spreadsheet. The capital invested, the variable capital, and the surplus value are given values in Emmanuel's schematization, which comes from Karl Marx. So the value overall is equal to surplus plus wages plus constant capital. The rate of profit is equal to the total surplus value divided by the total capital invested. So it's 25% for everybody. The profit in this scheme is equal to the rate of profit multiplied by the capital invested so we get these numbers. The price of production is equal to the profit plus the capital invested. Yeah, it looks right. Now, in order to observe things in a more direct way, I'm going to make an additional calculation. I'm going to calculate the international value divided by the national value of each hour of labor time. What I mean is I'm going to calculate the price of production minus capital invested divided by the actual value minus capital invested. So countries that benefit from this system will have a higher ratio here. Well, the ratio is more than 1. And countries that lose out are going to have a ratio less than 1. Meaning more than or less than or 1 means that your hours in your own country, your hours of labor in your own country are going to be worth more or less than they are represented on the international scale. So this is equal to the price of production minus capital invested divided by value minus capital invested. So for A, it's slightly more than 1, meaning their hours are over, the hours are considered to be more valuable than they actually are on the international market. And for B, it's less than 1, meaning that they have to work extra, they have to work overtime just to get up to what the international average value production is. So let's consider some more examples. Because right here what we're observing is that A is supposed to be a metaphor, or A is supposed to be a representation of rich countries which have high organic compositions and who benefit from world imperialism. Having a high organic composition of capital is represented by this number being large as opposed to being small. So A is a wealthy country, they have a lot of good machines, they produce a bunch of value, and they're overcompensated for it, represented by this number being bigger than 1. B is supposed to be a poor country with a low organic composition, meaning they have to work extra time, and they lose money. Well, let's consider the following hypothetical example. Let's say there was a country that was similar to these other two, but they passed ecologically friendly laws that meant that, let's say, instead of having the same factory that B has, let's say that our environmentally friendly country has to have an entirely separate waste disposal program, and they have to use very good ingredients that are hard to come by, and they have to do additional stuff to clean the factory because of their new laws. Well, let's say that they require let's say that they use 10,000 units of value in one production cycle. And let's say that they work the same amount and the surplus is exactly the same. Well, the value of what they produce is 10,120 units of value. It's incredibly valuable. Is this correct? The answer is yes. This is a correct reflection of how valuable it is to them, because they have to spend so much making these products that it suddenly is very valuable to them, even though the other two countries can still do it in the environmentally non-friendly way, and it's much cheaper to them. So what does this mean? Well, all of a sudden, the rate of profit is tremendously small. The ecologically friendly country has an inflated profit rate, which is not what you would expect. And suddenly, the ecologically friendly country's hours of labor are tremendously inflated, while the other two countries have gone to triviality. Now, what you would expect is that the country doing it in an unnecessarily difficult way isn't going to be winning. They're not going to be raking in imperialist super profits just because they choose to use up a ton of capital. Anyway, we could also consider the opposite example. Let's say there's a country of magicians who just conjure stuff out of nowhere, and they use, let's say, 0 constant capital, and they work for a full day and they're exploited. Well, they're just taking it out of nowhere, and they're only getting paid wages, but somehow this means that their labor isn't valuable at all on the international market. So for this reason, I don't think that the theory describes reality. Now, what I want to do is demonstrate why it's wrong. Okay, let's go back to these original tables. The assumption that we made, which I claim is false, is that the rate of profit equalizes. We computed this 25% here by calculating the total profit divided by the total expenditure. We labeled this as the rate of profit, and we just filled in this row of the column with this number. Nobody's going to stop you from doing this, obviously. This is just like, you're just inventing a number. In the next column, profit is written as T times C plus V. Well, it's not. I mean, if you imagine a company and it actually does have a certain rate of profit equal to a particular number, then that ratio times the capital invested is equal to their profit. You could also just, you could just invent a number and say that that's the rate of profit. That wouldn't mean that the actual profit observed in reality is computed with this formula. So the profit, these numbers in this column, which are labeled as the profit, is only going to actually be the profit if this rate of profit is accurate. And this rate of profit, the sum total rate of profit over the entire world is indeed this profit divided by the capital invested. That's just a fact given to us in this hypothetical scenario. The fact that each individual country does have a rate of profit equal to 25 is based on the hypothesis that the rate of profit equalizes. What I have over here is a chart from Paul Cockshott describing what the rate of profit is. What this chart is Paul Cockshott collected a bunch of different industries in the UK, oriented each separate one by the organic composition, and the y-axis is the profit rate. Now, if the profit rates equalize, this should be almost exactly a straight line, but it's not, which is evidence that the profit rates do not equalize. So and the theory of equalization of profit rates is a long-standing idea in economics because it's straightforward and it's easy to independently invent if you think about what a market is. And there are many different theoretical justifications you could give for why the profit rates equalize. But the observed reality is that they are not equal. So the equalization of profit rates it's not a fact, and it's also not something you can deduce from a true theory, because for the same reason. It is an idea present in Karl Marx and in economists before him. because they thought it was true, and also because they didn't have data to disprove it. The remainder of this video, I'm going to say what's actually true. I'm not going to make false hypotheticals such as the theory of equalization of profit rates. So, if we abandon the false theory of equalization of profit rates, this column is not 25% anymore. It's not going to be the same value for every row. So let's go back to this table. So let's produce a true version of this in the following way. Okay. First of all, delete all of these. Now, profits are theft, which occur by the mechanism of surplus value. In reality, profit is equal to surplus value. And the rate of profit, perhaps I could have done it this way. The rate of profit is equal to the surplus value divided by the capital invested. So the rate of profit right here is 0.2. It's not 2%, it's 20%. And suddenly the profit is exactly equal to the surplus value, which is true. And what we observe is that all of a sudden the entire theory, the entire existence of unequal exchange evaporates. The price of production, which is the phrase used in the text to refer to equilibrium value, which is essentially value, modulo the conversion to prices, is the same. You know, we have 360 value here, and we do various spreadsheet manipulations, and we end up with 360 at the end. So the international to actual value added is 1.0. It's 100%. Nothing else would be sensible. Let's see what happens in the other examples. All of these numbers are exactly 1. I mean, so for that reason, I will consider the theory refuted. The theory of unequal exchange is false because it assumes the false hypothesis of the equalization of profit rates. If we don't assume that, and we do exactly the same calculations, all the exchanges on the international market are fair, in the sense that your hour's work is worth 1 hour of work. Now, what I'm going to do now is demonstrate an improved version of these tables. And I'm going to do this in a way that concludes with a demonstration of how wages are pushed down because of the first world versus third world conflict, and specifically because of organic composition ratios. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build similar tables with different starting data. So these tables, the input data to these tables is the constant capital, variable capital, surplus capital, of each country separately, and everything else is computed. What is more useful, and what's more useful if you're trying to build up a model of the real world, is to compute the surplus value and to use as an input the quantity of product produced. Now, in these tables, they're based on value, which means that it doesn't matter what commodity we're considering, and it doesn't even matter if we're exchanging similar commodities, because we're just considering quantities of value abstractly. In fact, value, these numbers are taken to be objective. Now, the labor theory of value refutes the way that these tables are being used in Emmanuel's text. So, you could criticize these based on the way that I just presented by observing that everything past this point is a fantasy. If you consider this to be true, if you end up with a price of production of 125, the labor theory of value says that this price would have approximated the value. So, therefore, according to the labor theory of value, these numbers are all 125. So, according to the labor theory of value, for a separate reason than the rate of profits not being equalized, this table is incorrect, is impossible. I mean, if we're talking about a market system and you apply the labor theory of value, then whatever the output prices are, the law of value says that these have to approximate the value. And the value, which is given right here, I mean, they have to be the same according to the law of value. So, so what's being done here is that, contrary to the law of value, these columns are different, and we're using that difference to investigate profits and the rate of profit, which is based on surplus value, etc. Now, what I'm going to do next is approach it differently. What I'm going to do is I'm going to consider value I'm going to consider constant capital and variable capital. I'm going to consider what it produces, and I'm going to compute profits and surplus value based on that. Now, in order to do what I just described, what's going to happen is I'm going to start with the constant capital and the variable capital, and I'm going to consider what is ultimately output by each country, which means the price of production. But in order to go backwards and compute the rest of these tables, the rest of these columns, an additional thing needs to be known, which is how does the products convert into value. Now, the answer to that question is, in this table, the products are converted into the amount of value in each product is just given by the way that these numbers are distributed in the first three columns. In reality, according to the labor theory of value, like, these columns should certainly add correctly into the value. However, in the first place, value is the value of a product is the socially necessary labor time, not the amount of value that you put into it. So what's written in Emmanuel's text is value equals C plus V plus M. This is wrong. Because he is making the common mistake of thinking that the labor theory of value says that the value you put that something's valuable according to how much labor you put into it. You know, the reality is that something is valuable according to the socially necessary labor time, which is entirely allowed to be different from these values. I mean, for that reason, the discrepancies that he's inventing here are the column that's equalized isn't the rate of profit, but it's rather value itself. And your failure to approximate the actual value according to the labor theory of value is where exploitation and arbitrage comes from. It is not the equalization of profits. Okay, so I'm going to build my chart in the following way. This is the input data. The input data is that the socially necessary labor time for producing one of this particular commodity is 10 hours. Country A has a constant capital of 240. Let's say they have a variable capital of 60, so they work for 60 hours, and they end up producing 36 of this particular commodity. I believe this table is simpler than Emmanuel's table conceptually. So what is the value that we've produced? The value that we've produced is the socially necessary labor time times the number that we've output, not the capital used up plus the variable capital. In fact, it's more than that. The surplus value is the value of what we produced minus used up constant capital minus wages. The price of production, according to the labor theory of value, is equal to the value. So I'm going to fill this in just to demonstrate that you obtained a similar table to before. Now, similar to before, country A, let me see. Produces an output of 360 in terms of value. They work 60 hours and they have a constant capital of 240. These numbers are all identical using this method where I've done it by amount of output. And it's similar for country B. In this version, the amount of output is a given and the surplus value is computed. So let's consider the rate of exploitation, which is not a value considered in Emmanuel's text. The rate of exploitation is equal to the surplus divided by the variable. Which is to say, a 100% rate of exploitation means that the capitalist steals in profit the exact amount that the worker receives. So the total wealth of society is, if the rate of exploitation is 100%, the total wealth of society is split evenly between the capitalists and workers. And that is what occurs in country A. You can observe that in Emmanuel's table by looking at variable and surplus are equal, which means that the rate of exploitation is 100. It's also going to be true in country B. Yep. Okay. What I want to do in order to demonstrate the conclusions that Emmanuel wants to come to is by considering this country C here. The conclusions that Emmanuel wants to come to is that workers in the third world get paid less and wages in the first world are inflated. Now, it doesn't happen because of unequal exchange, because as I demonstrated, unequal exchange doesn't exist. What happens is this. The first world has a high organic composition, which means that the tools are technologically more advanced. So let's say the workers work the same amount of hours, 60 hours. And let's say that our advanced tools use up as much resources in terms of value as the less advanced tools in country A. So this number is 240. But the more advanced factory produces 10 times as much as country A, meaning that their output is 10 times as valuable, and the surplus is a astronomical number. Does this make sense? Well, if you're producing an astronomical amount of output and your workers are working the same amount of hours for the same wages, then of course the surplus is just going as profits. So the rate of exploitation is extraordinarily large, 5,000%. This gives the workers this gives country C a lot of freedom. So in this model, the socially necessary labor time is a parameter. I hypothesize that it's 10. I suppose it's 10. Now, in reality, it is a consequence of economic data. For example, it is equal to the value of what you produce divided by the amount of what you produce, which you can see on this table. However, these countries might not actually be doing that in a situation of organic capital differences. So if country C is producing so much, they are probably exchanging this at a rate much more than it actually costs them. So, in other words, the socially necessary labor time in country C is probably less than this. Now, let's suppose that country C were to tend towards a rate of exploitation of 100%. How would this occur if the SNLT changed? Well, the SNLT is equal to the value divided by the output, number of output, which is equal to constant plus variable plus surplus divided by the output, which can be rewritten as constant plus variable plus the rate of exploitation times the variable divided by the output. Now, CV and O are given, and if we suppose that the rate of exploitation is 100%, we can compute the internal socially necessary labor time. We're doing this because in reality, if you have high organic composition of capital, it does not mean that your labor is more intense or that the rate of exploitation is astronomically large. What it means is that you are just producing them for less value than everybody else. So that formula is this. So we observe that for A, if they were to have a rate of exploitation of 100%, which they do, the socially necessary labor time for them is 10, which is what it is. For B, the same occurs, even though their numbers are slightly different. But for country C, who produces so much of this commodity that it surely couldn't be as valuable to them than other people, well, the socially necessary labor time to them, if you assume that they have a more realistic actual rate of exploitation, is reduced. If that's real, what's going to happen is that the objective international SNLT will go down. Because C isn't going to keep getting away with this, and A and B aren't going to be having it at the old, difficult value. What's going to happen is that the objective socially necessary labor time goes down. Now, all of a sudden, country C still makes huge profits because they're still producing ridiculously more than everybody else. The rate of exploitation goes down because the object is becoming less valuable. So if we look at country B, their surplus has gone from 60 to 12 as the SNLT approaches reality. But for country A, their surplus is in fact negative. This can't really happen for them, so their only opportunity is to cut costs and pay less in variable capital while still trying to have the same output. So what they have to do is jump down to 48. They're paying their workers less, having the same output, and finally they can only just now get up to 0 in profit. Now what they could do is, keep going down, keep paying their workers less, and of course the profit goes up. But, this can only go so low. And the countries with a high organic composition who's able to produce exorbitant outputs in terms of productivity, in terms of raw material, well, the international value, the international socially necessary labor time is just going to punish the poor countries who can't afford the technological improvements.